Is the PlayStation 3, the Xbox 360, the Wii U, the Nintendo 3DS and the PS Vita considered retro gaming? With the current economical situation we are living in, when RAM and SSDs are worth more than pure gold, it feels that technology has stagnated. We as gamers were used to and expected the announcement of the next generation consoles by now, and yet after 6 years of the current PS5s and the Xbox Series X, we have somehow more expensive consoles than before. Due to these shortages, players like myself are ever so more convinced to go back to the past and play some oldies to save up. A used console or a good old trusty emulator are much cheaper than whatever this price tag is. I do enjoy playing older games, and in this channel I always warn my lovely audience not to fall for FOMO. Having said that, I believe the definition of retro gaming is a bit fuzzy. The Atari 2600 released in the 80s definitely is. The Nintendo Switch 2 released last year definitely isn't. But where is the line drawn? What defines retro? And by definition, what defines modern gaming? Is it just about graphics or also about the game design? Well, of course the answer is more complex, but first things first, roll the intro. By definition, retro gaming refers to vintage games, no doubt about that, but when does something become old news in the industry? It used to be the case that console generations would be, in comparison to now, not only fairly short, but also drastically different from each other. I truly do not believe I need to explain in detail what jump was to go from 2D to 3D, from HQ to HD. Come on, you can see it by yourself. There are only 5 years between GoldenEye for the Nintendo 64 and Metroid Prime for the GameCube. The difference is both visually as well as mechanically striking. Even within a generation, there will be a technological leap. Take an early PS3 game like Yakuza 3 released in 2009 and Far Cry 3 released in 2012, both running on the same hardware, yet the tech jump is more than evident. Going back all the way to the first Super Mario Bros. And Super Mario Bros. 3, both NES classics, it is clear that the evolution of the gaming formula within the same console was possible. Needless to say, the same is not true for today's generation. Not only have games kept the same graphical quality for almost a decade now, but mechanically speaking, little progress has been made in the gameplay. This entails that we cannot solely base our definition of retro gaming on time, how many years have passed. I can tell you that The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt was released 11 years ago in 2015. Yes, 11 years ago, in 2015. And yet, none of you watching this video would have the guts to call The Witcher 3 an old game, let alone retro. So what gives? When does a game generation become retro gaming? The short answer is, there is no right answer, but that makes nobody happy, not least you who click on this video. The long answer therefore is my opinion, that the 7th generation of video game consoles, aka these consoles you see on screen, are in fact not retro, despite recently celebrating their 20th anniversary. We all kind of collectively agree that the PS2, the GameCube, the first Xbox and the Dreamcast generation are retro, or at least retro enough that it sparks no heated debate defining them as such. The reason why is because games made between the year 1999 and 2005 feel strikingly different from today's games, both graphically as well as mechanically. Picking up an oldie such as GTA Vice City, Ratchet & Clank, or Luigi's Mansion feels like jumping to a whole different gaming universe, one that not only looks more cuboid than ours, but also more limited. Levels were smaller, side content scarce, the whole scope of the video game felt more contained and focused. Mind you, this is not a critique, quite the opposite in fact. There are players that do miss such simplicity within their gaming experiences, that is why retro gaming is en vogue. But specifically because these games feel different and appear different to what came before and what came after, the vast majority of players, myself included, consider them retro. In fact, you could group generation of consoles in greater assortments, based on how games looked but especially felt. The first 2 generation of consoles made by the Atari and the Coleco had one way of playing, while it is a bit more primitive, experimental, pioneers of the very concept of digital entertainment. Nintendo and Sega's NES, SNES and Mega Drive generation had another way of playing, one that is more definitely different from what came before and after, but one that feels much more familiar to us, one missed by many. The 5th and 6th gen, we are speaking now about the N64 and the PS1, the GameCube and the PS2, made a jump to 3D environments, from pixels to polygons. They had their own way to structure games, similar in some aspects to their 2D counterparts, that felt different from today's typical way of envisioning gaming despite sharing the extra dimension. But what about the last 3 generations of consoles? Do they fall under the same umbrella? Despite a greater gap in time, I would say yes, they do. I would argue that structurally speaking, the games released on the PS3 and the Xbox 360 do not feel that strictly different from games released today on the PS5 and the Xbox Series X. In the 7th generation, we observed the birth of the first true open worlds, of the importance of side content, on impactful branching paths, of the now beloved free roaming, the online functionalities, all characteristics that describe current games. Of course, an Assassin's Creed Brotherhood and a Zelda Tears of the Kingdom differ, but do they differ as greatly as, say, a GTA on the PS2 and GTA 5? Especially at the end of that generation, we observed an evolution in game design quite striking, one that is still striking today. Games like Persona 5 run on half a gigabyte of DDR3 RAM on a PS3, nothing when compared to 64GB on a DDR5 in high-end computers today, and yet Persona 5 is by no means an obsolete game, quite the opposite. As gamers, we definitely were not expecting much of a jump between the PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4 games, because again, we were used to umbrella generations that included two consoles, as described earlier. What we were not expecting from PS5 games, however, was for them to be more of the same. Worlds got bigger, now they are in 4K, sure, but mechanically speaking, no current game has revolutionized the formula in a meaningful way. If you pick up a game like Crysis, released all the way in 2007, you will not only find an outstanding looking game, but from a gameplay perspective, it will not feel outdated to players who are used to modern shooters. The number of remakes and remasters also does not help. In the past 10 years, we saw an incremental amount of titles being repurposed on newer hardware that honestly did not require many upgrades. Sure, it is nice that Xenoblade Chronicle X is playable on a console people actually own, but the Switch 2 edition did not change the gameplay structure, it just made the game portable. Speaking of, portable consoles, contrary to their home counterparts, did see a notable jump from the 2010s. Between the 3DS PS Vita and the Nintendo Switch Steam Deck, there was a huge difference on how games were made. Comparing an entry like Kirby Triple Deluxe and Kirby in the Forgotten Land is unthinkable. They have vastly different scopes and scales, made for two very different, well, generations. I already made a video comparing older portable devices to new ones, so I will not repeat myself too much here. The core message of that essay was to highlight how the game design between these games and these games is vastly different. Not better per se, but different. Defining the 3DS and the PS Vita as retro therefore makes sense, since not only there was a big technological jump, but the game's philosophy behind coding games on the newer platforms changed, something we do not see happening on the home consoles. At this point of the video, you might be wondering why I'm going on such a tangent to explain why I do not consider the Xbox 360, the PlayStation 3, and to that extent the Wii U retro gaming. Sure, my reasoning might make sense, but what is the end goal in discussing semantics? I think it is very important to make clear what retro gaming is, because we as gamers need to be ready, whenever that will happen, to the next generation of consoles, one that hopefully has something that we can truly call innovation, truly next gen. Okay, hear me out. If and when the PS6 and the RTX 680 or 780 will come out, when 128 or even 256GB of RAM will be hopefully common and fairly priced, we as gamers should not simply expect games to look nicer, to be a generic greater than ever, but rather a revolution in how games are made, in their core structure, for games to feel different. It is in my opinion useless to have a new generation of consoles that again struggles to lift the umbrella we discussed earlier. If games released in 2030 feel similar to games released in 2010, then we either do not need a new generation of consoles, or we must make amends that we reached peak gaming and a saturation in the market. The reason why there is still debate today, in 2026, if a console released in 2006 is to be considered retro or not, should make us think on how little progression there was in the game design. As players, do not care if a title is running at 120 FPS in 4K. We care if our newer games have that something special that makes the jump to next gen worth it. Of course, I do not know what that something might be. Perhaps NPCs will have an incredible smart AI. Perhaps Roll will have a dynamic system that makes every playthrough drastically different. Perhaps the traditional controller will be no more. Who knows? Your guess is as good as mine. Until that day, games released today are conceptually the same as the ones released for the PlayStation 3. That's why everybody's still playing GTA 5. Granted, even if that day arrives, there might be a share of players who enjoyed the old way games were made and play. Retro gaming is not going anywhere. Until we do not have a noticeable jump with the next gen, we will not and should not consider these consoles to be retro. All this for sure, but not obsolete. It is a bit odd being a gamer who saw the last 20 plus years of gaming history. On one hand, it would be disingenuous to state something like games have barely changed, because that would be discrediting a myriad of extraordinary titles that moved the industry ever so forwards. On the other hand, to think that there were only 20 years of history between the very first Super Mario for the NES and Shadow of the Colossus for the PS2, with all these technological jumps in between, makes it clear that progression has definitely slowed down. In 2007, I would have defined a 10-year-old game for the Nintendo 64 to be retro without thinking twice, and yet doing the same now does not feel right. If you made it this far, I wanted to thank you one too many 7th generation of consoles times for watching today's video. This thought experiment was not initially supposed to be such a reflection on gaming as a whole, yet here we are. What do you think about the generation of consoles? Are they retro gaming for you? I wish you all a wonderful day, and until next time, arrivederci!